Welcome to the MTD Technical Corner. Today we're going to be breaking down the barriers to entry in regards to automation, and we're going to be discussing why you should automate, and you're going to be answering some of the commonly asked questions. Welcome to the Technical Corner, Ashley.
Thank you.
Ashley, automation, I mean, it's been accelerated in the last year or so, certainly in the UK with COVID. And some of the questions that we've been asked at MTD are kind of simple ones or quite obvious ones to many, but questions such as, how can you make my business efficient by introducing automation? I know that's quite a broad question, but nevertheless, let's start with this.
Yeah, so I suppose it's how you use the automation effectively and efficiently. So automation is all about a stable process, and a stable process is tool life, swarf management, in-machine probing if possible, are you able to use sister tools, and creating that stable process within the environment that you're looking at. So looking at actually materials, so aluminiums, mild steels, and how they react to the products that you're making.
So what you're trying to say, Ashley, is that the technology, the automation, the new technology that is available to the end users, let that do the repetitive tasks and let your employees do the process development, the interesting work, to bring down the cycle times even further and to create that stable process that you're referring to.
Definitely. I think of an SME subcontractor, we look at 30% of any job is setup times and getting your first off and getting the part running, and 70% generally is a repetitive task.
Now, in the UK, is it safe to say that the majority of end users are doing, low volume to medium volume work? Would you still recommend for these end users to automate, and why?
Yeah, you don't need big batches to automate. For a product to be automation product to be successful in the environment of a high mix, medium volume, it needs to be three things. It needs to be flexible, it needs to be quick and easy to change over parts, and it needs to be easy to use. You can't be having specific guys that only one person can run it in the whole factory. But one of the main things is that flexibility.
Now, flexibility, talk about flexibility, and another commonly asked question is, can my robot, usually when you buy one robot, you go and invest in a second, but can my robot be used to automate two machines? And can you give me any examples on this?
Yeah, so but the answer to that is yes. You can put one robot between two machines, but it generates a few questions and how you actually use it in practice. So generally, if you've got to set up something like this, you've got machine one, you've got machine two, and a robot sat between them. So things we need to consider are, is machine one feeding machine two? So is that op one and that op two? We need to look at cycle times and make sure we synchronise those cycle times. Think about the end of arm tooling. So actually, can the robot grip both parts? So then do we need to look at head changes on the robot? And also, because we've created a cell, you lose an element of flexibility. So setup times are of course a little bit longer because you set two machines and then the robot. Whereas if you had a robot per machine, you could set the robot on one, set the robot on the other. But by creating that cell, it does pose a few areas that need to be answered straight away. So if you've got to tip down a machine one, or the machine one is down, can we continually feed machine two? And is that possible with just a second op? So we need to think of all things like that. Very
interesting. And how I see this kind of setup really, Ashley, and correct me if I'm wrong, but would it really lend itself more to higher volume work as well? If you're making your own components, for example, and you can really synchronise the machines and kit them up for that automated kind of cell. Would you agree?
Definitely.
With that?
That's generally, we see that's dedicated to something, a family of parts, one part, but a company that make their own products. But the misconception that it's cheaper to do that rather than one robot per machine, it's not true, because the size of the robot to reach all of its areas needs to be generally very big as well.
Makes perfect sense, and you've raised and identified some fantastic points there. At the end of the day, it's more important to keep that spindle turning rather than automate. And automation should help keep that spindle turning rather than not.
Correct.
Now, you've got two robots here, the mill assist and the turn assist. So you have got industrial robots to suit 5th axis machines, 3 axis machines. multitasking lathes. These are industrial robots. Can you tell our audience, and another commonly asked question, what is the difference between an industrial robot and a cobot?
The simple response to that is a cobot works with a human, and an industrial robot will replace a human. But if you're cutting your teeth with automation, or it's the first step into automation, be very careful with the collaborative robots because of the integration side of it in particular, because you have to integrate everything. You have to integrate the work holding, you have to integrate the grippers, and generally it's about that stable process. It's down to you as the user to ensure that that happens from the path of the robot down to the work holding, down to everything, and also the rigidity of them isn't the same as an industrial robot, but with an industrial robot we will give you the full integration. So the two heads on the robot, the air blow, the full path that the robot takes, so the path is always generic to wherever the robot will be going for the pick and place.
What about payloads?
So payloads, it's no matter the principle of the pick and place, where the robot's going to and from, the principle is the same, no matter if the part's 1 kilogram or 80 kilograms. So
I mean, in reference to cobot and industrial robot.
Oh yeah, for sure. Sorry, yeah. The payloads are an awful lot higher for an industrial robot. So there's certainly a cut-off point of your 10, 12 kilos.
So there's massive points to consider when looking to automate. Now, with COVID, I hate mentioning COVID all the time, but it's certainly created a lot of market changes. I think that we've started to embrace a lot of the new emerging technologies, which include digitalisation, Industry 4.0 and automation. They're all kind of interlinked. Mm-hmm. Can you give me some examples of the market changes that you've seen and identified?
Yeah, so market changes that we see here generally are what force people to look at automation. So what the automation will give them, the productivity, automation will give growth, and the bottom line, increased margins. With the right automation, that is, it does need to be, you need to, it's a key thing to look at. But some market changes that force us to look at it are, of course, increase of labour costs, which is probably the most expensive commodity to any workshop and any component. Just-in-time principle, which is less inventory, less stock, large variation in demand, which is of course that high mix, low to medium volumes. Finding actually skilled engineers is a huge one, because there's a hole that needs filling. Globalization, so your competitors are no longer people down the road, they could be people in different countries fundamentally. Then Industry 4.0, which is obviously something which is banded around at a very high level, but that's certainly something that happens over decades. It's not an overnight thing.
Agree. Now, globalisation, the world is certainly becoming a smaller place, and automation is key to make us more competitive in this global market. But let's really concentrate on the small manufacturing businesses here in the UK. Mm-hmm. You know, what kind of savings can they expect from automation?
Yeah, so to give a couple of examples, two key things that I find from an installation and what an install will give you. So we generally will do an install. Companies will have a batch of parts that take 4 weeks to go through a workshop. Generally, those 4 weeks are made up of maybe 50, 45, 50 pounds an hour that capacity is sold for. And that's achieved over 4 weeks. Generally, we'll find once that's automated, labour-free, through the hours that you're not machining, you'll find that will go through the workshop in 2 days, 3 days. And if you think about your hourly rate is what you achieve over 4 weeks, what that compounds it down to, you've shot through the roof with regards to your hourly rate.
Yeah, so I mean, Ash, you know, you wouldn't go and buy a machine tool to just run it 8 hours a day, would you? You'd buy it to run 24/7.
That's it. So yeah, there's a few, some of the benefits, as you said there, were I think that we look at that sometimes are overlooked. So multi-control of machines through a single operator, physical relief, and of course fundamental increase of margins. So there's a lot that is not foreseen that you can achieve from the automation, that hidden costs that you save.
And can you show us in a bit more detail some of these costs?
So an example of any subcontractor that if the spindles aren't turning, they're not earning money. So as an example, on a single shift, remember this is just a single shift, you're not 24/7. If you're running 24/7 and you're not automating, you need to. But if you're running a single shift of an 8-hour day over 200 220 working days a year. That's a total of 1,760 working hours. Nobody's machines are running for 8 hours a day flat out. So because of lunch breaks, settings, first off. So of that 8 hour day, typically we say a workshop runs for 5 hours a day. So the spindles are turning. So your actual output of 5 hours times 220 is actually 1,100 hours. So that is a more accurate cost. So the 3 hours that we lose from that 5 to 8, if we just set the robot running to just run whilst the lights have gone out for 3 hours every day. So 3 times the 220 is 660 hours. And so from just 3 hours a day on a single shift, that's 60% increase from just 3 hours a day. So things like that make a huge difference and work in practice.
Well, the increase, if you were running 24/7 and unmanned running overnight, must be incredible.
Yep.
Ashley, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this technical corner. I'm sure that our audience have definitely learned a lot. If you have any questions at all about automation, contact Hydrafeed.